Hey everybody, and welcome to episode 2 of our Let's Play series, where we're playing through the original scenarios with a little bit of a realistic tinge, as I try and kind of bring my experiences from real life here into the original RCT game. So this is Dynamite Dunes. We've got to get 650 people by the end of year 3, with a park rating of 600, so that's a fair bit more time than we had to deal with in Forest Frontiers, which is just fine for us actually. We've got the existing Mine Train, which is kind of a first big coaster players encounter when they get into this game. We're going to mess with that a little bit later as we make it maybe a little more realistic. But first, I wanted to start with a carousel because it seems like the right way to start. You know, it's not exactly a moneymaker, but I think it anchors the front of the park really well. And I've always been a big fan of placing flat rides kind of across the way from the path over like a little pond or something, especially here that we're in the desert, because with all the sands texture that we have to deal with here, it can get really kind of monotonous and homogeneous, I guess, as far as land textures go. So I want to really make some little oases, I guess, as we go along. So here you're going to see introducing a little bit of grass, a little bit of that grass and dirt texture, which I really think mixes well, and then more landscape and plants as we go along. You'll see I'm building a little bit of a midway there, kind of like we did in Forest Frontiers, just to create some kind of double path work, give our guests somewhere to go, and then also just kind of give us a little bit of structure in the overall path work as well. Same thing with anchoring it with those flowers and some big trees, just to make it look real nice kind of through that whole space. We'll stick a scrambler in there as well at the front, give our guests something to do. Again, not like they're huge guest draws or moneymakers, but I want to start with something like that. We'll also plonk down a haunted house here, and kind of like we said during the Forest Frontiers one as well, I always like to put these up on a little bit of a precipice, kind of off on its own a little bit. We've got some mountainous terrain here in the middle to work with, so I figured I'd take advantage of that. And also, we got these pretty spectacular views from around this, I guess, mine pit, for lack of a better term, that this coaster is in. So I really kind of picture guests standing in the queue for this haunted mansion being able to kind of look down this pretty substantial drop off into this pit with a giant coaster in it. I think that's pretty cool as far as that goes. So I wanted to play on that a little bit. You'll see us circle that pit with a little more stuff here later on. But it's high time for a first coaster here. We're going to start with a proper wooden coaster. I want to use the terrain here a little bit to advantage and kind of keep the supports lower on the lower side with this. And maybe lead to a little bit more creative of a layout as far as that goes. I'm not necessarily sure where we're going initially with this one, as I kind of get into the build a little bit here, but as our build goes on, I kind of see a little bit of a CCI coaster layout here. That's Custom Coasters International, where they were really known for a lot of their kind of swoopy corners, especially very underbanked corners, and just kind of some oddball layouts that I really wanted to be able to stick with. So I'm trying a couple different things here with these kind of swoopy corners, forgetting for a little bit that they're unbanked, just because I'm so used to playing RCT2 and all of the full features there that I kind of forgot that you can't bank them. And really, it makes no effect aside from a visual difference here in the game. It's just a little bit startling when I'm used to having them banked. It just looks a little smoother as far as that goes. We're gonna try and double up here a little bit with the side by side trackage. Realistically, that makes sense from a wooden coaster standpoint, just because you're going to save money on the amount of bents that you're using. The bents are the kind of perpendicular structures to the track that support everything. So you're going to save money by putting those side by side. I think it just looks better in general. We're actually going to go triple here, kind of side by side with this little bit of a turnaround here. I do like what these kind of little slalom right left type corners, often having one that's unbanked and one that's banked, because I feel like it just, I don't know, it works okay to save you a space because you don't have to go quite as far, translation wise horizontally, and I don't think it's a big issue as far as it goes. I feel like unbanked of the largest of the corners is probably okay in general, and probably looks all right. So here we go with a completed wooden coaster. Not a super long layout, but I don't think it needs to be honest. It's kind of I'd say a mid-range family ride. We get the 6 cars per train. We've got the 2 bench PTC cars, which I'm not entirely sure there was many other options in the original game. This might be the only one that there is, but regardless, that's what we've got, and got our block sections and everything set up for that. Do a little bit of cleanup around here as far as some fencing and just a little bit of detail work goes. We've since unlocked the swinging ship as well, so that gives us something else to plonk down here, which I'm going to try and put on this little kind of hill. I want to call it a mountain range, but I guess it's not that dramatic. But I figure it's a kind of a nice way to put it up onto something. We're not going to put water around it, unlike we did on Forest Frontiers, just because I feel like it's the right move for this. I'm also going to go ahead and swap this around just because my realism tendencies kind of get to me a little bit here. And we're going to put 2 stations in here with the block brakes and have it run a little more realistically. But we're going to get back to that coaster here a little later because I want to really give it an overhaul. But we need to make it some income first. And our income's coming through gate admission, not per ride sales, which is not typically my favorite, but I wanted to experiment a little bit on this one just because it's not what I usually do, so why not do that on some of the easier ones. But we're going to get into a log flume here, a pretty big log flume as well. I always like to do at least 2 drops if I can, and this one's got 2 pretty substantial drops. We are going to use the terrain again a little bit, put a tunnel in there. I do kind of like tunnels on flumes when possible. I just feel like it's a good little interaction to change up what you have going on there, just because there's so little you can really do with them. There's only one size of corner. You get the S bend, and that's about it. You only have the one angle of drop. So whatever we can do to make it a little more interesting and change up kind of the overall just appearance of the ride, I suppose. I also like when we do drops on these to put water underneath of the drop, whether it's immediately underneath of it or one even below that. For one, realistically, water rides are going to have some kind of a basin where the water is dumped after the ride is closed for the day, because it's not going to be cycling through for the whole thing. A lot of parks actually use a natural lake to pull water from for that kind of thing, or in other cases they have a basin that they filter or pull with pumps and everything for the day. So we're going to lower all this section right here, give ourselves a little bit of water. This comes at a fair expense, but I feel like it's worth it doing at this point because I know it's not going to totally kill us, but I think it looks good. And it also, again, gives it some, or gives our desert a little bit of color and just a little bit of that life in general. And you'll see here, too, as I introduce these little patches of greenery here and there. I think that makes the most sense for a lot of those sorts of things. So I am, like I said, using the gate admission. So we're keeping up with some advertising just to keep a steady stream of folks going through. I think we capped out around $50 for admission here because that was most guests were carrying. And if we went too much higher, we'd be turning folks away, and you definitely don't want to do that. I'd rather have every guest at 50 than turn some away at 60. So we're going to make sure we pay a little bit of attention there. But the wooden coaster is doing well for us, and you can charge a bunch for that. And the log flume as well, it always gets a lot of people in it, which I appreciate. So that's good to have something going on there. Let's get some trees around there, get some fencing, and just clean that up a little bit. One of the most useful scenery pieces, in my opinion, or well, scenery genres, I guess, is the fence type. I really think the fences and just some of like the simple bushes and things can really elevate your park to a good new level, and it just feels natural with separating guests from rides or other natural landscape or things like that. So I want to make sure that I'm doing something at pretty much every pathway with fencing, not necessarily lining the path adjacent immediately, but I want to do something with those fences just to make sure that I get a good consistency throughout. We're really focusing on that post and rope fence here. We've got a couple of the kind of darker wood fence, or I guess the brown wood fence as well. I do really like that fence too. It's a little more industrial, I suppose, or I don't know, lower theme, but I think that's all right. And then I tend to use this one with the mesh for a little bit more kind of robust fencing if I'm more adjacent to a larger ride or something, just because that seems a little less like you would want to cross it than maybe that double post fence there. So we dropped in an elevated top spin just to give us a little bit of view from the guests kind of standing down there, so at least they kind of have something to look up to, and it makes the ride look a little more imposing. And now we're looking at doing another coaster here. Initially, I was looking at a couple of pre-built ones that I had messed with a little while ago, but I thought, it didn't really fit, and the costs that I had weren't really lining up with what our income was at the moment, so I wanted to do something maybe slightly different. So while we pay attention to what guests are carrying coming into the park, we're going to make up a little bit of money here so then we can do something a little bit different. And again, I was looking at doing some kind of a complete circuit, typical junior coaster here, but I had a suggestion in the chat. I can't remember who it was that suggested it initially, but the suggestion was to do a Vekoma family boomerang, which those are really popular these days, and it's a great suggestion. I don't believe the reverse incline mode was available in the original game, especially for this type of ride, but we do have it now thanks to Open, so I'm not going to completely turn my back on those features because I feel like it is kind of a natural, easy addition, and it really doesn't, do anything substantially different to our game. So I'm going to embrace it and go with this just because I do like the idea for the ride too. Downside is you only have the one vehicle or the one train, but the upside is a relatively short cycle. It's got the forwards and backwards, so it's got some pretty good excitement to it, and it should generate a pretty good line as well. Our layout's pretty darn simple. We do have a tunnel, which I like, and our kind of little spike here off in the backside. You do kind of want the spike to be a little bit more of a feature, so I am going to drag a pathway over this way as well. And we're also going to incorporate in this swinging inverted ship that I was just pulling up there for a second, because that way it gives us a ride that we can kind of pull around the back here. We are kind of looping our carousel now, which is fine. Given the layout as it currently is, I might have done that a little bit differently, but you got to be able to grow with your park as it continues, and that's okay. Carving out a little bit of the mountainside there to get underneath of the coaster, but I do feel like we've got some pretty cool interaction with the coaster there, especially as it dives down that corner and into the tunnel. Just a good little view spot of that sort of rocky crag as it goes down and into the whole thing. We're going to expand our landscape here just a little bit and make this oasis just a little bit larger, so that really when you come into the park, you get this kind of lush original area. So we'll fix that up, and then we're also going to deal with some restrooms here and also some barf, which is not doing so well because I haven't really taken care of that. I did put some specific path areas for our handyman to take care of as well, just because I don't typically do that, but I was seeing a pretty hefty amount of that throw up kind of condensed to the one spot, so I figured we might as well take a look at that. So now we're looking at another ride to put into this area just to increase the density a little bit as we look to make a little bit more money to do some other things. So we're going to go for something maybe just a little bit cheaper here, and that's build a car ride. I think I said in the last video that I don't do a lot of car rides just because I don't feel like they ever get many people as well, but at the same time, they also do look good, and I just like tracked rides in general, so we're going to try something a little different here, and we're going to dump the station underneath of this little kind of mound that we've got right here along the backside of the top spin, and we'll use that terrain to kind of help hide a lot of the things. And it'll also kind of inform how we're going to build some of the hills on this thing and kind of wrap around the whole space. It's not a terribly long ride, but it does give us something to work with. And I think it worked out pretty okay to fill that location. And it doesn't take up a whole lot of existing space, nor cut off anything for later either. I am going to extend it just a little bit here just to give us some variation as well. We're going to go with the trucks just because I feel like it's maybe sort of this, I don't know, call it more like an archaeological expedition. Granted, we don't have the theme pieces for anything just yet. we will get some of those pieces later. So until then, I'm going to drop a couple of cacti in there, change the landscape texture just a little bit, and give it a decent look as far as that goes. All right, so we've got a pretty good park going so far here with two of the coasters, and then plus our existing coaster that we started with. We got the log flume as well. Going to work on some beautifying here, dropping in a couple of flowers. We've got our statues and other things like that. There's kind of a limited amount of stuff that we have to work with as far as that goes, so we don't want it to end up looking too repetitive, but at least we have something to work with there, and we'll see what we can do for all of that. So we'll keep our advertising going just to keep people coming through the gate, because that's really the important thing at the moment, and really try and get all that going through, so we can keep generating revenue, because that's the only downside of not doing it per ride and doing it for the entrance. I like I said, I tend to go per ride because it does give kind of little nuggets of money pretty much continuously rather than larger chunks all at once. So now I'm going to do something a little bit extreme and maybe a little controversial, and I'm going to effectively delete Dynamite Blaster, this mine train here, and I'm going to replace it with a more realistic mine train. Not that I don't like the original Dynamite Blaster, but at the same time, it's not terribly realistic. It was pretty extreme as well, and I bet you we could probably fit a pretty good, actually realistic mine train into this space as well. So we're going to take the style of a Vekoma mine train, so with the double parallel lift hills here, and we're going to kind of do a little first half, connect with the second lift hill, and then do a second half that goes back into the brakes in the station and everything. So a little bit of trial and error here, using those sidewalls with the tunnels. Typically, I don't advocate doing a lot of fully underground tunnels. In real life, that's terribly expensive, but at the same time, I feel like this is probably an okay thing to do, especially if we get this pit that's already existing. So we got the first half there, a little bit of kind of a back and forth slalom. It doesn't have to be terribly long, because remember, we've got two halves here. We want the two halves to be relatively the same length, not too much different, because we don't want any of them to get held up by the block sections throughout the whole thing. So now it's just trying to find a route that we can stick through here that doesn't hit any of the other stuff, and that's not terribly difficult, but it is going to take a little bit of landscape work and kind of readjustment there as far as it goes. But here in the end, we were able to work our way out and then pop up to the same level as the brakes in the station there. Now, one thing that I do note, if you end up watching any of my streams, you'll know that I always advocate not putting rides on the ground, or at least tracked rides, especially coasters, because they need a support underneath of them. There's a few exceptions to that, and actually the mine train, I would say, is one of those, because you can see with the kind of faux themed sleepers there with the wood ties, it does effectively look okay sitting on the ground. You have to imagine there's a little bit of a foundation that's, say, flush with the ground this train is sitting on, and track and train are sitting on, and then we have it raised up a little bit with that rail that we can get, say, upstop wheels and everything else in there. In general, the mine train ride here in the game is not totally realistic, but it at least references the real thing. So we're gonna stick with it, and we're gonna go with that on the ground, and I think it's gonna look okay. I'm also gonna take this queue and kind of route it through the pit a little bit. I would have liked to do it a little farther, ideally, but I didn't really have too much space to go with, and it's also pretty far down there, and I really don't want to have our guests walking down a whole bunch of stairs and then back up a whole bunch of stairs or ramps or anything like that, so we're going to try and avoid that if we can. We'll clean up the landscape a little bit in here. We've got some money to do it now, which is kind of nice, so we are able to change this up a little bit. And then we're also able to run longer trains than we had before. With our block sections, we can run 3 trains, and really effectively, with as much people as this can pump through now, we're really never going to see full trains, which, it's a little bit of a shame, but at the same time, our capacity is just absolutely hammering, so it's great. That's what we want to see. We don't really ever want to generate a big queue if we can avoid it, especially if there's demand for the ride, so I think we're doing good there. Now we're going to do something a little bit crazy, and we're going to try and shove a railroad into this whole space. I was kind of looking at this little valley in front of the Haunted Mansion and thinking, it'd be kind of neat if there was a train that kind of popped out of the landscape here underneath the Haunted Mansion, went into another tunnel here on the other side, and then went around. So we're going to do that. Again, I don't like to do really long tunnels like this, but it's somewhat unavoidable as far as that large mountain goes. And as I said before, I really don't like to do elevation changes for railroads or monorails or things like that, just because you really don't see that in real life. But what we're going to do is bury a station in here, and then we're going to do these kind of 2 longer tunnels just to get it through that mountain on either side. And then we're going to connect it around the back side of Dynamite Blaster. Single station, I don't need this to be a transport ride. The park isn't really big enough to really require that by any means, but we'll have a queue that kind of winds its way through here a little bit, gives us something to suck some of those guests into and get them off the pathway. If anything, that's really one of the things that just help our overcrowding, and as we build our guest count here and just try and pull them off of the space. By the way, I do realize that our little goals information thing here in the bottom left is covering the attendance and our park rating. It's also covering the webcam that we used to stream this episode initially. So I am going to fix that here going forward from Diamond Heights onward if I can, just to move our camera up a little bit so you can see what's going on. Suffice to say, we're doing pretty all right as far as the goal goes. So really, we're just trying to keep on building right now as we wait for October year 3. So this path here is meant to really make a loop out of our kind of general flow of the park. As much as possible, I like to have loops rather than dead ends, just because it really helps to continue with wayfinding, and you don't get nearly as many guests lost when you have a loop that continue around. We're also going to drop a tower ride in here, one of these SNS shot towers right kind of in the middle of this whole space, trying to give a little bit of ride interaction here with our mine train. It's not that we need the extra space, so we don't need to cram it in there, but I thought it would be kind of fun to have that, and then also just to have a little bit of queue throughout this whole thing. I think it would be kind of neat to picture everybody waiting for the shot tower ride while you have this big mine train rumbling around you the whole way. I think that could be kind of neat. And then we're going to drop down and duck underneath the railroad for it, so it's nestled in there very nicely, I think, and I do tend to prefer the turbo drop rather than the space shot option, only because I don't really have to worry about setting the launch speed and everything. Not that that takes any time, but it's a one-click thing for the turbo drop, and it certainly gets plenty of people in there as far as that goes. So we managed to unlock a bunch more coasters now, so trying to decide what to do, and I figured we probably need a looping coaster in here just to give some variety as far as that goes. I did like a suspended coaster as well, but at the same time, they cost quite a bit and they take up a huge amount of space, and I really didn't think we were having the money to properly do one of those. So in the end, I went for what was going to become here a very kind of small, compact arrow type corkscrew design. I'm not the biggest fan of this one. I'll readily admit that I really don't like how this layout turned out, but it does fit the area and it works okay. You'll see once we get to testing it a little later, or I guess once we get out of the time lapse and we look at the real time stuff, you'll see that it is way too fast, way too fast. But for this circumstances here, we're just going to roll with it and get it to line up nicely. It's sort of a modified take on the standard arrow corkscrew layout, where it's got the loop and the standard loop screw layout, where you get the loop, the turnaround, 2 corkscrews diagonally adjacent to the lift hill, and then wrap around and tie back into the brakes. So we can't really do that in the game because we don't have diagonal corkscrews. Obviously, there are ways to do it. You can kind of stretch it out a little bit and make it work, and that's generally fine, but I figured for this one, I'm going to do more of an L-shaped layout. I am stretching the corkscrews a little bit. I've gotten some questions about why I put a straight section in between the corkscrews, because it does kind of break up that continuous roll. The only thing is, the corkscrews in this game are just so small that I almost feel like it looks better when I'm stretching out all the other elements to also stretch out this. We are putting a couple of straight sections in general here just because I have to make up some gap. So it's one of those things that I think comes down a little bit to personal preference, but I do think it looks okay with the straight section in between. I'm not always going to do that, but for this one, I think it was the right move for it, so I didn't have to have a full 3 sections of straight track on either side. Not that there's anything necessarily wrong with straight track. I think that's actually kind of underrated sometimes, but it works here. We'll go with it. So we're going to connect it in. We're going to do our 2 trains here. We've got nice long trains as well. I always kind of forget how long the corkscrew trains are in this game, but we'll make it work. And we're also going to drop another scrambler here in the middle of this ride. I don't tend to like to do the same ride in a park over and over again, but there are only so many rides and attractions that you get for this that in some cases I just kind of have to think of it as sort of a generic flat ride, for example, and we're just going to drop another one in there, and it's not going to be, the worst as far as that goes, and we can kind of plausible deniability say it's all right, and that works okay. So we're not doing too bad at this point. We did unlock some theming here, so I'm going to drop some Egyptian theming around this wooden coaster, just for no other reason. This is a desert map, and it feels like it's an appropriate thing to do. So we'll put some kind of different parts and pieces here, just to give it a little bit of nicer look to the whole thing. I'm also going to upgrade the pathway in our little midway there, then change it up a bit. I do like to have 2 different kind of pathways, just to at least give it a little bit of interest. So typically I kind of have what you would consider a primary pathway, which is just kind of your general paths all around the park, and then sort of a secondary, call it your specialty pathway, that sits at key areas like plazas or midways or things like that. We're going to drop a little bit of Roman theming over there at the Vekoma Shuttle. And then I'm also going to go back here and start to throw in a little bit more landscape and trees as well, because really on the other side here of the mine train, we haven't done that. And we do want to add some variety in here as well. The big pit with the mine train in it does add a nice change from the kind of just large expanse of sand, but in the end that's just a large expanse of dirt. So we're gonna try and mix it up a little bit, and now that we have the mine theming, we can throw in some actual mine stuff in here just to reinforce this whole theme throughout the whole space. It is a pretty big pit too, so we want to try and make it feel slightly more human scale, because we are effectively dropping half of a coaster height into this whole thing, because it doesn't go terribly far above the top of the rim here. The whole thing almost takes place down in this pit. It's kind of a neat idea to think about. I guess it's sort of a Six Flags Fiesta Texas type moment there, but it's kind of neat to see. So we'll throw in a little bit of mine theming to help that out, and then a little more landscape here, just to give it some interest, give ourselves a little bit of a grove of trees for this thing to go through. So we'll put bits and pieces there. General strategy is mostly grass and dirt, a little bit of regular grass. We're going to pick from a variety of, say, 3 or 4 trees here, and then I always love to spam these bushes, because I really feel like if you're going to have trees, you need the bushes. You at least need that to kind of soften the edge around the whole thing, and you can spam the heck out of these bushes. You can put so many, and even when it feels like too many, you can even put a little more than that, and it'll still look fine. So we're going to put a little bit of mine theming over here as well. I think it's okay to kind of double up on that with multiple rides. Here we are spamming those bushes like I just talked about. I figure here with this drop, it's going to be splashing water off on the side. So in all likelihood, you're going to have a pretty soggy ground underneath of this. So it would make sense for a little bit of greenery down there, maybe some bushes, some weeds, and some other things to propagate throughout that whole space. So I feel like it's an appropriate little bit of landscaping there. And then again, just around the log flume in general, because it's going to splash. You're going to get water everywhere. It generally makes sense, I think, to have a lot of greenery around that log flume, for sure. So as we continue through, we're going to just kind of theme up our space. We're really at our goal, so it's just kind of beautifying the park at this point. And there it is. We won our goal there, but we're not quite done just yet. I want to do a couple more things before we finish up. Now that we've won, we're less concerned about the management of the goals and really just kind of finishing up the park. One of the things that I thought would be good to get into would be another transport ride at some point. We got the train, even though it is only the one station, which was generally on purpose. I don't think we needed a second station. It didn't feel like it was a long enough train for that. But I wanted to do some other things, whether that be a monorail or a sky ride. So while we wait to unlock a couple of those things, I am going to come through here with some land textures and really make that work for ourselves through that whole space. The park itself is fairly sizable, and you can buy a lot of land too, so it does give you the ability to really expand this if you want to, but you can also keep it, somewhat compact. I think we've done more or less that. Here we go with the sky ride, though, as I did want to fit something in here, and I thought it would be neat to go over top of the mine train and try and weasel our way through here. I don't put curves on sky rides. While technically it is a possible thing, and you could do it at sort of a mid-level station that disengages the cable and re-engages it. Busch Gardens Tampa, for example, has one like that. For the most part, you really don't see that. It's not a terribly common thing with sky rides, so we're gonna stick with the straight point to point, which is kind of my preference in general. So we've got a little bit of landscape or a little bit of land to purchase here as we go through, but that way we can kind of set it down on this side. We can set it all the way down on the ground, and we can avoid some of these other rides as well. One of the things too, if you go just kind of straight with a sky ride, you don't necessarily have any of these pylons and towers with it, and I feel like you need one every so often just to kind of continue that whole look throughout the space or throughout the ride as you continue through it. So I do like to vary the height just a little bit here and there just so that we kind of get pylons every once in a while. Ideally they'd be somewhat regularly spaced, but they don't necessarily have to be. I just want the pylons there just to at least give an indication that something is there, because really if you don't have those, the cable is fairly thin and oftentimes it just kind of looks like it's floating. So we're gonna do a little bit of elevation change to kind of help that out as far as it goes. We're also going to beautify this out a little bit and just wrap up the park. So that's pretty much it for Dynamite Dunes. We're gonna jump ahead here real quick, and we'll look at the real time, and then you can see all these coasters here operating at actual speed. So let's jump over. So here is our Dynamite Dunes park in full. So let's jump in and take a look at the stuff in real time. We've got our Oasis entrance here with this nice little pond that kind of reflects the carousel on the other side. We've got our scrambler here as well, and our swinging inverter ship kind of in the back here. It's maybe not the best spot for it, but this ride I always feel like I have some trouble finding a good place for it. But let's jump over here and pick up this coaster train here on the lift hill. I haven't named really any of these, so feel free to suggest some names if you want in the comments, but let's take a look at this guy as it goes along. You get a couple of little swoopy diving drops here and going up and over the hill. A lot of speed management kind of up and over the whole thing. A little slower than I would typically like, but I think it's actually okay in a lot of cases. It actually works pretty well as sort of a mid-level family type wooden coaster is kind of what I was going for. And stat-wise, we're high, medium, which is generally all right to me. We did get a little bit of that Egyptian theming in there as well, before we got too far along. Back on this side, we've got our trucks ride that goes through this little kind of mound of landscape here with our station here buried underground. I do kind of like the blue trucks. They reflect nicely against the tan landscape here of all the sand. We've got our top spin here. I did like to put a fountain in the front of it, as a lot of top spins have. So, typically I'll do 3 across, but in this case we just had the 1. That's okay. I think it works pretty well. And then our little Vekoma shuttle here with our tunnel underneath the carousel. Got a cool reverse spike. We get really close to the end there, which is maybe a little close for comfort, but I think that's all right. Speed's maintained pretty well through the whole thing. And as you can see, we get a pretty darn good line here, too, which is, I guess, good to see, especially because we're able to charge a fair amount for it. Here's station 1 of our sky ride that goes off to the other side. And then our log flume here that has the 2 drops. So they're actually similar in height. I tend to like the big drop to be at the end, but in this instance, we've got a little tunnel here. We've got some of this mine theming throughout, so not too bad all around. We've got our haunted house here, which is one of the earlier things we put in, and our swinging ship. Also, our train, which has the station underground here. Really, the train came about only because I kind of saw this little valley and thought, it'd be kind of neat to see sort of train tracks here popping out and popping back into the mountainside as far as that goes. So that's what we went with. Of course, our big ride here is going to be the mine train. Like I said before, it's maybe a little bit sacrilegious to remove or relatively delete the Dynamite Blaster, since it is such a classic original game attraction, but I thought we could maybe do our modern take on it with some good realism in there, and I think it turned out pretty alright. We've got the 2 lift hills here side by side. The block braking works pretty well in my opinion. It actually lines up pretty alright too once we get everything loaded. This is the one that's off sequence, but once we get this one dispatched, and the second one coming in behind it, you actually do end up with both of these lift hills having a train on it side by side at some points, or not necessarily side by side, but there is some interaction going on, which is kind of nice to have as far as that goes throughout the whole thing. So looks pretty good, and it's high medium again, so I'll take it. That's kind of where we're trying to land in most instances. We got our shot tower right here, or I guess our drop tower more so. With the queue that kind of winds through here a little bit, which I do like how that turned out. So here's our Corkscrew Coaster. Like I said, it's really way too fast in my opinion, so again, if you have any name suggestions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'm not one to name them, but maybe I should start to get into that a little bit more. So we kind of start out similar to the typical loop screw design, but as you can see here, we're not too bad on the loop, but here at the corkscrews, a little bit too fast. Not awful, but it's enough that we're still going to get high medium, but we're on the upper end of high on intensity, which again, not the worst thing, but it's not my favorite either. We'll work a little bit better on speed management the next time. And then of course, here's where our chairlift lands on the other side, so not too bad, I don't think, as far as that whole thing. This would be a heck of a view, wouldn't it? Because you go from being kind of this high off the ground to almost double that when you go into this pit. I feel like that's kind of a neat thing to picture yourself as a park guest, kind of looking down at this big mine train that you cruise over top of for the whole thing. So on the whole, I think we did pretty good. We had to have, what was it, 650 guests, and we have 1463. So not bad at all as far as that goes, and our park rating is immaculate. So always good to see that as well. Looking overall at the park, not too bad. I feel like we did all right for this whole thing. And again, it's the easy parks at the beginning, but still, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out, and hopefully you guys enjoyed it as well. So we will continue next time with number 3, Leafy Lake, and go on from there. Again, if you wish to watch any of these, go on live and offer your suggestions in person while we're going. Twitch.tv/Amusement Academy. To check all of that out, and I'll have all the links to the socials and stuff in the video description here if you feel like following all of my other bits and pieces. So until next time, thank you all very much for watching, and we'll catch you in the next one. Bye.